What is up, everybody? John the Morgile here, back for The Globe is Dead, Section 4. We're going to cover a variety of topics, but I wanted to just kick it off with a little clip that I made, sort of to go over the basic proof involving the moon, which should only be visible during its full moon phase at night, and should only be visible during its new moon and the cycles, the portion of the cycle surrounding new moon during the day. So check out this quick clip, and then we're going to pick off section 4 of this series right where we left off in section 3. Not 3.5, but section 3. So anyway, just enjoy this clip, and then we'll be white-black. Because the sun is over that away, you can kind of see it creeping up over there. That's due east, and a full moon in the west. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. Okay, so just a quick note, I shot this video on August 19th, and as you can see in this diagram here, that it was basically a full moon on that day. Pretty darn close to a full moon. So this is, the phase of the moon on August 19th, 2016. Right there is due west, almost full moon in the morning. That's about east. This right here, a full moon in the morning. Now, how does that work in the heliocentric model? How are you gonna have a full moon in the west in the morning? Figure that out. See, once the sun has risen, say you're near the equator, it's hard to show 3D curvature on a two-dimensional surface. So just to give you an idea of the tangents involved, you can sort of look at the top and bottom of the circle to get an idea of what's going on here in terms of curvature. So once the sun has risen and it's visible over the horizon, there were some houses and stuff covering it up from that vantage point, but you're going to be, obviously beyond the twilight zone. And if you're facing even slightly up into the air, because if you're facing parallel to the ground, that would be the horizon. Your line of sight converges with the horizon when you look parallel to the ground. So in order to see something overhead, you're going to have to look up towards the sky, obviously. And so once you're on the daytime side of the Earth, your line of sight towards the sky is going to be a pretty steep tangent to that curve. And similarly, you can sort of see it here at the bottom. Now, the same thing would apply here. You wouldn't have a straight line of sight towards the moon. And again, the full moon would have to be on the far side of the Earth compared to the sun. That would be the full moon condition. It's fully reflecting back at us because it's got a clear line of sight to the sun. If it was on this side, it would be a no moon. You wouldn't see the moon. But in fact, the phases leading up to and away from no moon or new moon phase should always be on the day side of the Earth, but that's another argument. The point is that a nearly full moon visible during the day is physically impossible and disproves the heliocentric model. Alrighty, so I just wanted to sort of get that little snippet in there because it was an observation that I had documented a couple months ago, and I feel like it's a very solid piece of evidence against the heliocentric model, so I wanted to get it in here. And from this point forward, we're just going to sort of snap right back to where we were at the end of section 3 of The Globe is Dead, so it may seem a little bit incongruent at first, but we're just literally picking up where we left off after section 3. So if you're watching these all in sequence, they'll make sense, although I did get section 3.5 in there, which was more of a deeper dive into section 1, but what the hell, just enjoy the rest of the video.
Due to the alleged orbital motion of the Earth, at sunset, the Earth is allegedly racing down away from your feet at 66,600 miles an hour. 12 hours later, in a perfect world at sunset, the world would be allegedly racing up towards your feet at 66,600 miles an hour. At midnight, the Earth would be flying from west to east under your feet at 66,600 miles an hour, and at noon from east to west under your feet at 66,600 miles an hour, which all needs to be added to or subtracted from the spin of the Earth described earlier. Every second of the day would be unique, and we would necessarily experience so many different phase shifts in our inertia relative to the spin and relative orbital path of the Earth. All of these extreme, velocities, often in contradiction, constantly changing. For a stationary observer at the equator, it would be obvious. Look out your window, look at the sky, and honestly ask yourself if you believe all of this motion is taking place. At the same time, we must remember the sun is allegedly flying around a curve at about 483,000 miles an hour in a great circle around the galactic center in a 250 million year cycle. This is, of course, theoretical, as nobody has ever observed this cycle. The heliocentric model claims that our ecliptic, or the orbital path of the Earth, is misaligned to the galactic plane, or the sun's orbital path, by about 60 degrees, meaning we would necessarily experience all sorts of acceleration here on our little spinning ball based on variable conditions in the sun's orbit, compounded by the Earth's orbit, compounded by the Earth's spin. And finally, the galaxy itself is alleged to be flying through space. It's away from the center of the Big Bang, or towards the Great Attractor, depending on who you ask, at some untold millions of miles per hour. So again, the argument used by many globbers pertaining to the motion of the Earth, likening the world to an airplane flying at a fixed velocity, are merely parroting what they've heard and have not actually thought this through objectively. The world is very obviously stationary, and there are basic observations and even physical experiments which can be repeated to show that we're not spinning, nor are we flying around the sun. Ergo, the heliocentric model is crapola.
Oh, I see that one. I thought that one's coming straight down. No, a little over this way. Oh! That was awesome.
People in basic instrumentation would definitely notice the difference between dusk and dawn when we're experiencing an acceleration from 66,600 miles per hour up towards our feet to 66,600 miles per hour in the opposite direction, down away from our legs, while zipping around a curved face of the Earth at over 1,000 miles an hour, vertically dropping around that curve at 135 miles an hour and not noticing it, because it's a fixed frame of reference without any acceleration, and therefore it's not felt, because only acceleration is felt. When you add the constantly phasing variables and changes in relative velocities involved with the theoretical globe-Earth model, you have anything but a fixed frame of reference, as we're dealing with spinning spheres traveling in multiple directions at the same time, along varying curves at speeds ranging from 1,000 miles per hour in terms of the rotation at the equator, to 66,000 miles per hour, the orbit of the Earth, to 500,000 miles per hour, the orbit of the Sun, and over 1,000,000 miles per hour for the galaxy. It's obvious that if this were indeed the case, we would be able to recognize all of the varying acceleration combinations from day to night, and observable space would indeed be vastly different than what we see over the course of an evening, or from season to season throughout recorded history, for that matter. Honestly, can you even imagine the velocity 66,600 miles an hour? Do you think you'd notice the difference between the Earth racing up towards your feet at sunrise and down away from your feet at sunset, going at such an unimaginable speed? You certainly would notice it, along with all the other alleged motions which cannot be observed, measured, or sensed by any person or instrument anywhere, because the Earth is actually stationary and the most perfect fixed frame of reference you can imagine, solving all of the conundrums mentioned previously. Airplanes fly relative to the ground below, which remains ever stationary, regardless of the speed or altitude of the plane. If the plane does a perfect 90-degree nosedive, the ground below will be perfectly stationary beneath the nose of the plane. So it's fairly obvious that the Earth is not spinning, nor is it a sphere. The world, being a stationary plane, has never moved a smidgen. Of course, we have plenty of room for tectonic plate movement on the flat Earth, where the land masses appear not to be fixed to their relative locations.
Now, in just taking a cursory study of this topic, I found a pretty huge anomaly in the tectonic plates, which I'll try to describe to the best of my ability, and maybe somebody out there has an answer for this. But if you take a look at the diagram on screen, you're looking at the proposed tectonic plates, which make some degree of sense until you go. Again, we're looking at sort of a Mercator projection here, where the west side of the map is the same point as the east side of the map, right? Assuming the Earth is a globe. What I've found, though, is if you overlay or put next to one another, these Mercator projections, the west side of the tectonic plate here, this Pacific plate, does not match up whatsoever with the east side of the eastern plates. So you can see here this Pacific plate sort of lines up with the Pacific plate on the east side of the Mercator projection and the west side of the Mercator projection. That's about the only point that matches up. What happens to this portion of the Pacific plate? Shouldn't this line continue on here? I mean, where does that go? Same thing with the Indo-Australian plate. Wouldn't you expect this line to, continue on west of the, on the globe? Or what are we missing here? And, you can look at the other side and it's the same thing. This argument here is sort of like, if you were to split this Mercator map down the middle, all of these lines would line up. They wouldn't be misaligned. So this is really sort of a mystery to me, and I think it deserves some explanation. I'm certainly no expert on tectonic plates, but it seems to me that they should be continuous plates and not just cut off at the edges of the map. It's very strange. I really wonder what causes this.
So it's fairly obvious that the Earth is not spinning, nor is it a sphere. The world, being a stationary plane, has never moved a smidgen. Of course, we have plenty of room for tectonic plate movement on the flat Earth, where the land masses appear not to be fixed to their relative locations. Since this is apparently the case, or we can at least humor the hypothesis because there appears to be geological evidence for it, were the Earth a spinning sphere constructed around a ball of molten lava, you'd expect the centrifugal forces generated at the equator to force the more dense matter, or the land masses, to tend towards the equator. Instead, the prevailing theory is that over hundreds of millions of years, a supercontinent called Pangaea, comprised of all of the world's landmasses, split apart and arbitrarily drifted apart without any apparent centrifugal forces affecting such continental drift at all. This is very counterintuitive if you're assuming a globe model. The plane of existence we call home is unique, unrivaled, and central to everything, and certainly supports the idea of tectonic plate movement and, aimlessly drifting plates. Diverse life and experiences, mysterious features such as the moon, the stars, and the sun, not to mention the Antarctic or the deepest oceans, which remain uncharted and unmapped. The world is really largely unknown. Yet our society possesses the technology to create free energy and explore, exponentially further than we've ever explored in the past. We could stop our addiction to petroleum and burning coal. There are technologies to get away from that, and not even necessarily talking about conventional things like windmills, solar power and whatnot. There's lots of free energy capability generated by the Earth itself, and this was well known to Nikola Tesla. They claim overpopulation is a problem here on Earth, but this is, to me, an obvious fiction. The world governments tend to sort of pack people on top of one another in overcrowded cities and reserve the majority of the land as federal property. There is so much open land in America, it's ridiculous. There is no overpopulation problem. However, the world governments like to round up as many people into cities to create the illusion of overpopulation. The Antarctic Treaty prevents us from exploring beyond the known surface area of the physical plane, although this is obviously a cleverly crafted control scheme to hide the extent of the plane. Not very many people need to be in on the scam. I've concluded that the most important secret of Freemasonic, Illuminati societies, whatever you want to call them, the biggest secret is the fact that the world is not a spinning globe and is indeed a stationary plane. Meaning the world is the centerpiece of the universe, not just a speck of dust orbiting a mediocre star. What lies beyond the path of the sun along the plane should be our primary focus as an intelligent race. What wonders lie beyond the known realm? What technologies will we, innovative and creative lot, invent once we really begin exploring this thing? How long will it take to wake up enough people to really begin exploring the edge of the frontier? I see this revelation as a major threat to the status quo, which keeps people under control using exactly mind control and ultimately slavery. If you think it's honky-dory to have a society where 1% of the people hold upward of 70% of the wealth, then you obviously haven't thought this through. Instead of whips and chains, our masters use lazy boys, TVs, cars, and all of our creature comforts and addictions, yes, addictions to cash and food and luxury. These are all psychological chains to ensure that we toe the line. Let's not forget the almighty dollar and how that has redirected our faith towards a society which is governed by faith in cash and nothing else. Even Christians with a proclaimed faith in God must make money to pay their way through life. God doesn't print money, but the Federal Reserve surely does. Even though the U.S. fiat currency is totally worthless, it's not even worth the paper it's printed on. It is our collective faith in its validity or its value which gives it its value. If such faith or our faith in the currency did not exist, the currency would hold no value. I think there are so many obvious observations which completely falsify the heliocentric model, it's staggering. Each and every one of these observations or experiments or measurements mentioned before alone are sufficient to dispel the spinning spheroid hypothesis. Even with dozens of such proofs, we find ourselves trying to convince people to reconsider their position on what the world is. We're not forcing young children to conform to our worldview, but instead we're asking grown adults to simply reconsider what they believe and examine their beliefs objectively. This isn't science supposed to be an unending search for ultimate truth by testing hypothesis objectively? Isn't the process of elimination amongst the most efficient methods to discern the truth? Modern theoretical physics begins and ends with the assumption that the Earth is a spinning spheroid in the vacuum of the theoretical infinite space-time, which does not exist. Since the Earth isn't a sphere, space-time doesn't exist, gravity doesn't exist, and the observation, what goes up must come down, cannot possibly be used as proof of a spherical Earth spinning on its axis. I would go so far to say the observation is evidence to the direct contrary. In other words, the fact that objects released from an elevation fall towards the ground, assuming they are of higher density than the surrounding air, to any rational person, this should go without saying. However, unfortunately, the majority of the modern, educated world technically falls under the banner of completely disconnected from reality, deceived to the core about the obviously stationary ground we've always experienced in reality. I admit that I too was for many years, just as most still are, an unwitting proponent or repeater of such ridiculous conjecture and error, not to forget ironically ignorant to any theological or scientific conversation falling outside the realm of infinite space, galaxy, universe theory. I hope that enough people out there are able to re-examine the assumptions and conclusions involving our collective mind's image of the phrase planet Earth, and help others to see the truth and alter this collective understanding as well. I hope you see and understand how flimsy and unfounded the so-called proofs of the globe Earth truly are, and how abundant and clear and empirical the evidence supporting a static plane Earth is. I also find it important to consider the miraculous abundance of random coincidences involved with the heliocentric model. If you're not familiar with the premise that a theory or a story becomes exponentially less probable with each unlikely random coincidence added into the mix, such a premise is indeed very logical and is used by practical problem solvers or really anyone who uses common sense upon being told an unbelievable story full of random, unlikely coincidences. Not to say random coincidences don't occur, but when they are peppered liberally throughout a theory or story, each coincidental instance pushes the theory further and further into the realm of improbability, especially when the random coincidences appear to conveniently support a belief system or conveniently support a lie. Have you ever experienced a really unlikely coincidence, like where you've thought of a person or mentioned a person that you haven't seen in years, and then later that day bump into them at the mall? Such things have happened to me and represent fairly, an unlikely coincidence, and such coincidences are like 1 in a million, right? Now, if I were to tell you that the same day I randomly bumped into an old friend after mentioning them, I also won the lottery, got struck by lightning, and experienced spontaneous human combustion all in the same day, a rational person would immediately know that story's bullshit, especially after the second or third unlikely random coincidence, right? So with 4 or 5 such random synchronicities, the odds of the story being true are so infinitesimal it's not even worth humoring. I won't do the math, but the odds of such a lucky day I just mentioned are in the realm of 1 in many, many millions. The heliocentric model is a great example that is full of such random lucky coincidences which inherently rival any Copernican principle, for sure. Each of these elements alone are not necessarily evidence to discredit the heliocentric model. However, when considering all of them as a whole, the odds of the model being even remotely likely, in light of these myriad random coincidences, the odds are not good at all. Strictly from a statistical standpoint. For example, the sun and the moon appear roughly the same size most of the time, according to an observer on the ground. Yet this is a chance optical illusion caused by the sun being 400 times larger and 400 times more distant than the moon according to the heliocentric model. So, to put this in perspective, let's say you had 2 sets of numbers. two sets of 1 to 1,000 in a large hat, for a total of 2,000 numbers in the hat, each number having one duplicate in the lot. This is probably being very generous, as I'm certain the range and disparity between the distance to and size of a planet's moon and the hypothetical central sun could vary by many thousands of miles, probably entailing many millions of possible combinations. But we'll just keep it simple. But for example, you could have a very large distant moon, very far from the sun, or an extremely nearby planet to the sun with a tiny moon, with an infinite number of possibilities in terms of the apparent size of the sun and moon to an observer on a hypothetically spherical planet. Truth be told, the number should probably be much higher than two sets of 1,000 for the possibility of distance from the observer to the so-called star, and another 1,000 for the distance from the moon to the star. But of course, the size of the moon is also a major factor here, so we actually need to add another set of, say, 700 cards into the hat to represent the moon to sun distance, or to represent the size of the moon. We'll make these green cards with a single card that is purple to represent the jackpot bullseye perfect size of the moon, as the moon size and distance must be exactly perfect based on the random coincidence of the two distances between the observer to moon and the moon to the sun. So it seems we'll be drawing 3 random cards from large hats with 2,000 white numbered cards having duplicate instances of 1 to 1,000, and then 700 green cards, one of which being purple to represent the jackpot size of the moon. Now, what are the odds you would shuffle the 2,700 numbers well, pick the 2 identical 400s out of the white cards, and pick out the single purple card from the other 699 green cards? You would be very lucky indeed. There's a formula you could use to plug in these numbers to get the statistical probability of picking such a lucky streak, but I'll leave it to the people who claim that it's not that big of a coincidence that the sun and moon appear identical in size from the Earth while being so disparately distant and massive. We still need to add one final set of, say, 500 numbers to the hat, as the size of the sun is also going to affect the relative size of the moon versus the sun, according to an observer on the Earth. So we'll add another stack of 500 cards, which are, say, black, with one single number representing the bullseye jackpot card, representing the perfect size of the sun, as a single blue card. So what you'd actually need to do is draw 4 cards with 2 duplicate stacks of 1,000 white numbered cards from the hat, pick both of the 400s, then randomly grab 1 purple card out of the 700 green cards and manage to select a single blue card out of the pile of 500. And by the way, there's no peeking, it's all random grabs from a few bags containing a few thousand cards representing the distances and sizes to the sun and the moon. So, with the sun and moon distances and sizes being sufficient to render them apparently about the same size from an observer's point of view on the ground, even though the sun is supposedly 400 times further and larger than the moon is alleged to be a random coincidence, that's a pretty big deal, statistically speaking. Now, again, you could use an equation to estimate this probability of a random drawing taking place. This is infinitely improbable. It's a jackpot lucky streak of relative sizes and distances between the sun and the moon, but I'll leave the mathematical exercise to those who claim the sun and moon similarity phenomenon is not that big of a deal and is adequately explained by mere coincidence. Again, the highly unlikely coincidence described here doesn't debunk the heliocentric model. It's just one example of a supposed random coincidence, but could be considered the luck of the draw were it the only coincidence. Let's not forget the most gullible scientists think the universe is an infinitude of galaxies and stars and planets. So just by the law of averages, such a lucky streak is bound to happen somewhere in the so-called infinite universe. It just so happens that we're lucky enough to live on a planet which won that particular lottery. We'll touch on this in a bit, but what are the odds such a planet also has intelligent life on it? Now, according to NASA, quote-unquote, planet Earth is the only planet in our solar system with intelligent life. So, if there are supposedly 9 theoretical planets, including the hypothetically spherical Earth, only one of which has the mystery of life on it, intelligent life no less, In terms of the so-called planets which NASA claims they can study, but in fact they just produce cheap B films and trick people into thinking they're studying planets in space in real life, of course everyone believes what is purported to them by an authority figure on the TV, so NASA's job is fairly easy with an essentially unlimited budget for propaganda, or public relations. NASA has generated a world full of well-meaning people who hold a belief system that is so idiotic and logically repulsive, but contains so many unlikely random coincidences which indicates how highly improbable the accepted version of reality would be in a random scenario. Not to get off on a tangent with NASA, but we need to add yet another factor into the lottery analogy, but instead of some thousands of cards, we would need millions of grains of sand, on, say, a large beach. Life is not known to exist anywhere but here on the Earth, on the physical plane, yet theoretical physics assumes the infinite universe, therefore life is a surety elsewhere, and therefore the infinite universe must be teeming with life. Of course, teeming with life is a relative term, as lyrical hyperbolists claim there are some 170 billion so-called Earth-like planets in the universe, of which maybe 1% have intelligent life. This is, of course, ridiculous theory, but humoring this model and accepted theoretical astrophysics and their related statistics, they claim there are a number of planets I will have to research to pronounce. It's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. It's a quattuorvigintillion. It's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. So out of all the planets in the universe, allegedly or hypothetically in the lie-centric model, only about 170 billion, a fraction of a percent, are similar to Earth, and only 1% of those lucky planets supposedly have intelligent life. Now, I wouldn't exactly call that teeming with life. I would say that you're pretty lucky to be on a planet with life, or even in a solar system that has a planet with life, but whatever. So let's say you have an entire beach of sand, and you must randomly select one single grain of sand that has the words, "You are one lucky bastard," engraved very small onto the single unique piece of sand on that entire beach. Now, let's not forget, in order to even get to this far in the lottery of picking that, grain of sand out of billions, you would first need to pass the astronomically unlikely plucking of the 4 cards challenge previously to get the apparently identical sized sun and moon. I mean, really, what are the odds that a so-called planet inhabited with intelligent life, which is extremely rare, would also have an apparently equal-sized sun and moon from the Earth, or from the vantage point on that planet? This is like Powerball on crack, or like being struck by lightning 7 times in the same day that you win the lottery jackpot twice in a row. I mean, at this point, even the most passionate number cruncher would have a hard time calculating just how unlikely the whole Earth is a globe theory truly is in light of these 2 coincidences alone. Now, suffice to say, the mounting random coincidences are not casting the heliocentric model in a very good light in terms of likelihood or probability resulting from random chance. But random chance is supposedly the driving force behind the creation of planets and moons and stars. We're expected to believe the extremely balanced and serene world we dwell upon was accidentally created out of dust amidst total chaos. But we've only touched on a few random coincidences which just so happen to grace our apparently very lucky, insignificant world, the relative sizes and distances of the sun and moon to create the illusion of similar sizes of the objects observed from the Earth, which is one huge coincidence, coupled with the fact that quote-unquote planet Earth contains the perfect set of conditions to allow for perpetual self-replicating life forms, which is very unlikely. Now, even the conditions which are asserted to be conducive to life are coincidences in the heliocentric model, which are very unlikely random coincidences. For example, if a planet is too near of its sun, theoretically, or the barometric pressure is too low, then any water on that planet will boil away from the surface immediately, disallowing the possibility for life as we know it. If the planet is too distant from the sun, or the barometric pressure is too high, then liquid water is impossible, rendering the planet a frozen wasteland. So, for a universe governed by a Copernican principle as law, we certainly appear to be extremely lucky, at least, and really sort of unique and in a special position, even assuming the heliocentric model, relying on a myriad of observations only explained by a sheer unlikely coincidence. Not only is the heliocentric model a poor explanation for things, but it's highly unlikely and physically impossible. You could go on forever with examples of random coincidences that we must swallow in order to stay on board with the heliocentric model, but I'll add another one or two for layers of complexity into this ridiculous lottery of the round Earth's lucky random coincidences, which is the fact that we only see one face of the moon at all times forever. Now, this might not seem like a random coincidence, and indeed, the brainwashed scientists have come up with a theory called tidal locking, yet another theory to support their dogmatic, absurd belief system, to explain away the fact that synchronous rotation of the moon, or us only ever seeing one face of the moon, is just a random coincidence in the bullet speed spheroid Earth model, rendering the entire concept even less likely. So they had to sort of explain this away as not a coincidence. So theoretical physicists came up with the idea of tidal locking. They claimed that plenty of planets in the universe probably have moons with a geosynchronous orbit because of this. Theoretically, there are so many planets in their model, there must be billions of instances of this phenomenon, where an observer on a planet only ever sees one face of a moon, without any direct evidence to support these claims other than theory, and possibly fraudulent images from NASA. And of course, the ironclad belief system that the Earth is a spinning sphere in the infinitude of space in the first place, regardless of any evidence to the contrary. Just to give a better understanding of what's involved with the synchronous rotation or the synchronous orbit of the moon and why such a thing would be a wild, unlikely, random coincidence, well, we all know the moon goes through phases, assumed to be based on the reflection of the sun, which is lighting one half of the moon's surface at all times. But depending on our position relative to that of the moon, we see the moon wax and wane in perfect 27.322 day cycles. This is because while the moon allegedly has this 27.322 day orbital period, it randomly, coincidentally, spins on its axis at one single time per 27.322 days, creating the perfect conditions to ensure that only one face of the hypothetically spherical moon constantly faces down towards the Earth. Conversely, the other half of the moon ever remains pointing away from the vantage point of the Earth, leading to the phrase dark side of the moon. Now, this actually really does not work out because the moon's path of travel is supposedly elliptical, and so if it was spinning at a constant speed, then it would be thrown out of its perfect alignment, since an ellipse is not a perfect circle. So in other words, the moon would need to be altering its speed in order to favor or alter its speed conveniently enough to ensure that it stays facing downward, because again, it's supposedly orbiting on an elliptical path as opposed to a circular path. Anyway, the moon theoretically always gets the same amount of light somewhere on its hypothetically spherical body. However, the direction from which the moon is lit causes the subjective 27-day cycle of waxing to full and waning to no moon.
Now, I've already pointed this out, but the crescent or no moon or new moon phases should only be visible during the daytime due to the alignments involved.
As well as Mercury and Venus should only be visible during the day and should therefore never be visible from the ground, since we can't see stars or planets during the day. Now, according to the proposition that the moon and the Earth travel along essentially the same plane, as well as the planets along the ecliptic around the sun, the observation of the moon during its no moon phase and the phases leading up to that, the moon should only be visible during the day during that period, and likewise Mercury and Venus should only be visible during the day as well, and therefore invisible. So, the moon's plane of orbit is allegedly offset by the ecliptic by a mere 5 degrees, meaning the moon would remain on the day side of the Earth for just less than half of each month. That's sort of besides the point, but discredits the heliocentric model again. Anyway, the synchronous rotation of the moon is all very convenient and astronomically unlikely, taken as a whole or taken as a random coincidence, yet these are the sort of odds that we're dealing with when considering the heliocentric model. And all of the convenient improbabilities patched over by bizarre theorem to tenaciously support a belief system strictly supported by illogical theory. So tidal locking was developed to sort of explain away the highly unlikely coincidence of a geosynchronous orbit of the moon. All of these coincidences exponentially reduce the likelihood of the model, but hey-ho, it's only science, which is supposed to base conclusions on physical evidence, repeatable experiments, and always consider statistical likelihood of a theory, especially considering any sheer luck random coincidences that emerge when considering the model. I don't even see why this needs to be pointed out, but it does. Science was not intended to ignore theorem which are supported by physical evidence, and ignore an improbability factor so great in terms of a widely accepted theory like the globe model, it would make a snowflake in hell seem like a really safe bet. I want to quickly remind these observations of the moon and such must have an explanation in either model. However, the explanation is obviously going to differ by necessity depending on which model you're humoring. The two models are incompatible, mutually exclusive, and cannot possibly both be true. The world cannot be a spinning sphere and a stationary plane at the same time. Ergo, one of the two theories must be demonstrable and observable, while the other must be completely wrong and easily shown to be wrong. Furthermore, the entire concept of the universe must be totally different in one or the other scenarios, and this should be abundantly clear to an impartial, skeptical observer seeking to prove this one way or another. In any case, in terms of the phases of the moon, many flat earthers claim the moon itself is self-luminous, and or the phases of the moon are not in any way related to reflected light from the sun. I'm not convinced of this one way or another, still up in the air on this one, as there is evidence to support the phases of the moon indeed being resultant of reflected light, but we should reserve room for the possibility of explanations beyond what we currently subscribe to. If sufficient evidence is found to support the notion that the moon is self-luminous, then I may alter my opinion on this. I would also need to see sufficient evidence contrary to the theory of the moon phases being caused by reflected light, and a cyclical relationship between the sun and the moon, as opposed to such a relationship between the Earth and the moon in the heliocentric model. Now, I realize I've sort of gotten off the beaten path a bit, however, this is an important point that needs to be discussed and experimented with. One thing that is never mentioned is the fact that since the sun and moon are local bodies in the flat earth model, not hundreds of thousands of miles away in the case of the moon, and nearly 100 million miles distance to the sun, with this in mind, with them being much closer, it seems like there's been sort of an oversight that I would like to address maybe later on. But just getting back on point with the synchronous rotation of the moon as a random coincidence explained away by tidal locking certainly adds to the overall unlikelihood of the heliocentric model. Over the last year and a half, I've considered the sun and moon to be inherently related, or somehow connected, or possibly like two sides of the same coin, to electricity and magnetism, positive and negative, light and shadow, for examples of the premise I'm describing. Indeed, I believe ancient Egyptian mythology aligns with this notion, as they depicted the sun and moon as literally arch nemeses, akin to yin and yang, if you will, and they, of course, in Egyptian mythology, the sun and moon would wage a never-ending war, resulting in the victory of light, represented by Horus, every time the sun rises in the morning. Now, I wouldn't call this evidence, but I'm hoping to convey a point that the sun and moon have logically been considered as local bodies, physical or otherwise, closely related to one another. This is, of course, due to the fact that when the Earth is considered as a plane rather than a sphere, the estimated distance to the apparent sun is just shy of 4,000 miles. My friend Brian, who's a civil engineer, pointed out that this distance, based on plane trigonometry, is almost identical to the hypothetical radius of the imaginary globular Earth, and I find that connection very interesting. At any rate, the Sun and Moon couldn't possibly be placed at the extremely distant locations purported in the heliocentric jargon, where they are essentially unrelated bodies for all intents and purposes, as they are so disparate in terms of size, distance, and overall behavior. It is just dumb luck that they appear to be the same size. During the summer in the north, the Sun is traveling along the Tropic of Cancer. Conversely, in the winter, the Sun is traveling along the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere, or the outer semiplane. The Moon does the same thing over the course of a month, as opposed to the course of a year, so the Moon is taking this path at a higher frequency. The phases of the Moon appear to be caused by this constant cyclical flux of the Sun and Moon's position relative to one another, as well as the fact that the Moon appears to travel more slowly than the Sun through the sky. This is an observation that can be explained in either model. Of course, the heliocentric reasoning is that the Moon orbits the Earth in the same direction which the Earth spins, causing the Moon to appear to move more slowly than the Sun and the background stars. Of course, assuming the Earth as a static plane, the Moon is simply traveling slightly more slowly than the other celestial lights as it appears. I want to quickly mention that it has been shown that the signatures cast by solar eclipses disprove the heliocentric model as well. There are very specific conditions needed to create a solar eclipse, which involve the Moon being in direct alignment upon the ecliptic as it apparently transits the Sun. Now, according to the heliocentric model, the Moon's shadow is cast upon a focused area of the Earth, which is counterintuitive, since shadows can never be shown to focus down to a point. Instead, shadows always spread out in reality from the obstruction casting the shadow. In other words, the Moon's shadow gets smaller and smaller until it contacts the Earth somehow. Now, for some reason, science must break the physical attributes of shadows, which again always appear either the same size as or larger than the object obstructing the light source to create the shadow. Shadows always increase with distance from the obstruction. The only time you will see shadows getting smaller with distance is in the imaginary hypothetical situation involving the spherical Earth and the shadows cast by celestial bodies to explain eclipses. If you study the accepted explanation for solar eclipses, the Moon creates a needle-like shadow across the face of the Earth, and it sort of draws a signature across the face of the Earth. If such a scenario were possible, it could only be possible to occur in tropical areas in the globe Earth model due to the alignments involved. Remember, the Moon's alleged orbit is misaligned to the ecliptic by a mere 5 degrees, so it's claimed we only get solar eclipses when the Moon is in alignment with the ecliptic and passes in front of the Sun. So there's a perfect alignment along the ecliptic, which is the only possible way to produce an eclipse in the heliocentric model. But instead of strictly tropical or equatorial eclipse signatures, which you would necessarily only ever get, we see eclipse signatures which traverse the polar regions. This is categorically impossible in the globe model, and is consistent with alignments involved with the flat Earth reality, having much more nearby Moon and Sun. For complete explanation and further documentation of this, check out the Facebook page, $5,000 NASA Eclipse Challenge, or the linked video showing this evidence in a little bit better detail. Just wanted to bring that up. The eclipse's signatures disprove the globe. So that's just yet another one that could by itself alone disprove the globe. We base our calculations, globe and flat models, on the angular size of the Sun and Moon, along with other factors such as the shadow cast by the Sun to triangulate the distance. It's fairly common knowledge that you can plug in the numbers to a spherical or flat Earth to get two completely different distances to and sizes of the Sun and, of course, the Moon. The problem I have with all of this, globe or flat, is the fact that the apparent location and angular size of the Sun, and especially Moon, could possibly be way off because of how light waves are affected by physical atmosphere, like atmospheric lensing, also magnetic fields, are known to cause perturbations of light waves, which could have a major effect on how we perceive light coming from an outside source from our local system through a variety of layers of varying density atmosphere, as well as, again, electromagnetic fields emanating from the Earth. I don't think we should estimate the sizes and distances to the sun and moon based on calculations from the ground due to the principles I just mentioned, as the apparent angular size of these objects could be wildly different than what they appear. I shot a video on August 19th showing a nearly full moon towards the west in the morning in the clearly blue sky. Now, no matter how hard you try to finagle this observation to jive with the heliocentric model, it simply doesn't work. A full moon should only be visible at night and never during the day under any circumstances in the heliocentric model. Such a simple observation would be impossible in the heliocentric model due to the fact that the moon allegedly orbits the Earth once per month. Day and night are supposedly caused by the Earth spinning, so there's a day side to the Earth and a night side to the Earth at any given time of a month or any given time of a year. The day side would obviously always be the side facing in towards the sun.
Okay, so this is going to be a very nearly to scale diagram of catching a glimpse of the full moon during the daytime, even if it's, morning, say 7 o'clock in the morning, or during the day on the day side of the Earth when the sky is blue. That means, it's morning or could be evening. But and this is almost to scale. It's fairly close to being to scale. It's difficult to really get the mind-boggling scales down on any sort of viewable thing. For example, when I shot the video on August 19th, it was about 7 o'clock in the morning. My line of sight, and the moon was several degrees above the horizon, so it wasn't like it was just looming over the horizon. The moon was, if I was on the top of the world, I was looking up to see the moon. So these tangent lines are very generous to the globe model. Now, if we consider this Earth right here is about 8 inches wide, then 8 inches on this document equals about 8,000 miles. And so what I did was I put red markers for every Earth distance to get sort of an idea of where the moon is at during its full moon phase. Now the sun, we've got a top-down view. This is your North Pole here. These lines of sight would be somebody, near the equator. I'm in South Carolina, so that's, close enough. I may be up here a little ways, but my line of sight is going to be a tangent to the curve of the Earth. I can't see through the Earth, so I have to look up in the sky in order to see, celestial objects. Now, if you start to get an idea, I'll just try to slowly scroll. If you can start to get an idea of the distances involved to the full moon, then it would be in this exact direction, assuming the sun was, along this line on the opposite end of the Earth. And this tiny little moon is 2 inches in diameter, so it's a quarter of the size of the Earth. Which is, according to the heliocentric model, that's how small and distant the moon would be. There we go. Now I can back off of it, so you can just see a little bit better. And in reality, the distance represented here is only 168,000 miles, whereas the moon should actually be 238,000 miles, so it's actually about 70,000 miles short. So the moon should be, about 10 more Earth distances than is on this document, but it still gives you a pretty good idea. The damn thing's far ass away. Uh, these tangent lines, because again, I had good video evidence of the full moon in the morning, because it was actually August 19th in the morning. It was still sort of the moon, left over from August 18th, which was 100% full moon. So it was somewhere in between 99% and 100% full, close enough to give you an idea of how far the moon is allegedly from the Earth, and how is I believe, and how this shows it would be impossible to get a glimpse of a full moon during the day, knowing what we've covered in this video series.
Based on the current explanation for lunar phases in the heliocentric model, the moon should be on the day side of the Earth for all phases leading up to no moon and waxing away from no moon. The phases including and surrounding the full moon should always be on the night side of the Earth. So the fact that I shot a nearly full moon, in the daytime debunks the heliocentric model alone. Really, all the physical data you can tangibly verify shows the Earth to be stationary in terms of axial rotation and orbital motion for starters, as well as lacking any semblance of curvature or sphericity altogether. The joke is truly on those who believe their home is spinning around a 4,000-mile radius sphere faster than the speed of sound, while simultaneously vertically following the resultant parabolic curve at over 100 miles an hour, as the whole world orbits the sun at 666 miles an hour, at a 60-degree angle to the path of the sun, which supposedly travels around the hypothetical galactic center at nearly 500,000 miles an hour, as the so-called Milky Way flies through space over 1 million miles an hour, with exactly zero evidence for any of this motion, and a preponderance of empirical evidence proving this motion actually does not exist. Again, all physical experiments and observations, both on the ground and of the sky, show the world to be 100% static and more or less flat. Maybe a little lumpy, but certainly no sphere. This is a difficult topic to share with people, as you will normally instantly be labeled as a social outcast.
I thought he was joking at first, and I kind of chuckled. Yeah. No, there's no such thing as gravity. And then he started talking about how it's a conspiracy and everything. I thought, and here's this man standing on the floor, being held there by gravity, telling me that it doesn't exist. Now, do you think I took anything seriously that he said after that? Well, of course not.
In many cases, ridiculed by strangers or even people that know you. Many people have invested too much of their lives into fabricating a paradigm involving the idea of infinite space filled with Earth-like planets and Jabba the Hutt. Again, there is no such thing as a galaxy in the sense of a collection of stars capable of supporting planets. No such thing as space-time, no gravity as a warping of space-time, no dark matter or anything of the sort, except in the fantasies bound to our paradigm by the theoretical physicists from centuries past. Most people will laugh this topic off without the slightest skeptical study into the matter, yet label globe Earth skeptics as anti-scientific. The clever programming laced throughout life has rendered the entire culture blind to the plain truth, which is right under our very noses and has been there for our entire lives. Perception is everything, as we view the world through a series of filters which have been hardwired into our understanding of what is possible or what is possibly true. The amount of well-meaning, deceived people across the plane is staggering. I find it really rewarding to help people come to terms with this revelation, which is, I believe, unstoppable. I'm really surprised to see the amount of effort put into breaking the momentum of the static plain truth, although I suppose such a thing was, to be expected. There are hordes of enemies to this truth movement using a wide scope of tactics and diversions to muddy the waters of the discussion. That's why I like to keep it simple. One in particular that I'd like to cover is the truth movement itself, however, as this appears to be the most effective diversion to date. Of course, you have the mindless, relentless pro-globe trolls. Such people are probably comprised mostly of those beholden to the systemic, lifelong, generational programming of all modern people. They're not necessarily lying, although some of them may be. But they're attached mostly to the romanticism of science fiction and theoretical physics, which are synonymous, and of course the bold-faced lying and forgery by the likes of NASA and other military-operated so-called space agencies. I should probably mention the human condition, specifically the phenomenon of herd mentality, which is a self-reinforcing system of hysteria or mass hypnosis fueled by the egos and riches heaved at those who are involved in the pseudo-prestigious, pseudo-scientific aerospace industry. For one, people like to be accepted and feel smart, so they follow the herd. But this aerospace industry incidentally rakes in almost $20 billion per year just in government handouts, not to mention the untold hordes of private investments from the public at large. Sure, their investors probably get wonderful dividends to keep the Ponzi scam going, yet nothing of true worth will ever come from the likes of NASA. Sure, they create jobs, at least on the surface, but if you sent me or anyone $20 billion a year, we could create jobs counting the amoeba on the head of a pin, or perhaps create jobs cutting holes in donuts. But what sort of value does NASA actually deliver for their investment? NASA is a black hole for tax dollars and investment dollars spent on paying a bunch of brainwashed know-it-alls to design proverbial flying carpets and covertly produce low-budget films to perpetuate the standard theoretical models of nature to the trusting/oblivious scientific community. To say that our modern scientists and theoretical physicists have been asleep at the wheel is an understatement, but again, I will add the caveat that we can't entirely blame them, and it's hypocritical to bash on them too much. They, too, were subjected to the same mind control as everyone else. Of course, I didn't choose to dedicate my life to the study of physics, theoretical or otherwise, but who am I to judge? Fairly recently, NASA gave a State of the Lie Factory address, and Charles Bolden mentioned some thousands of new inventions and patents which are allegedly produced by NASA each year. If you try to research these alleged inventions and patents a bit, you'll find a great deal of circular links, dead links, some pretty big boasts about all their inventions and patents, conflicting accounts of the numbers of inventions and patents, and really no evidence of what exactly the hell are they inventing and patenting.
In space.
All of these are telltale signs of lies and the attempt to legitimize the spending that goes into sustaining the parasitical, liaretical hyperbolists infesting our space exploration industry and poisoning our understanding of space in reality for their own personal gain. Another major aspect of, or even a motive for this deception, is controlling psychology of people to belittle our self-respect and sap our collective feeling of significance on an extremely massive scale. In the deepest realm of the psyche, people like Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins will insist, as if it's a known fact, that everything came from nothing, and that things can come from nothing, and that all life on Earth is an insignificant sort of freak of nature. In fact, they will never even entertain ideas which betray this dogma or this Copernican principle, which essentially means the world cannot possibly hold any significance or uniqueness in the theoretically infinite universe governed by gravity and chance, and if anybody suggests something outside of that, those set of laws, it is instantly dismissed and ignored. Incidentally, the etymology of universe is essentially all things combined into one whole. I've mentioned this before, but this is also encapsulated by the phrase e pluribus unum, or from many come one, which is found all over the U.S. currency. On the other hand, another way to consider this, universe, is by breaking down the root elements of the word etymologically, une and verse. Uni, the prefix meaning one or singular, which is fairly obvious and straightforward, and then verse, which is open to a little bit more interpretation or speculation. For example, according to Wiktionary, the two main definitions for verse as a suffix are 1. Forming compound nouns denoting the whole range or totality of what is indicated by the first element, or 2. Forming compound nouns denoting the fictional world of a given character, television series, or etc. The definitions seem accurate enough, and I find the second definition rather ironic and amusing because it mentions the use of the suffix verse as forming a noun to represent a fictional world or fabricated location for fictional literature and entertainment. So we can accurately break down the word universe to mean one fake-ass place. This is obviously my favorite interpretation of what the creators of the English language had in mind when agreeing upon a word to describe the universe or all that is. Now, I'll be the first to admit that my lifelong understanding of the word universe still triggers images of infinite space and countless galaxies, even after a year and a half of deprogramming myself. It's fairly difficult to consciously and concisely observe and understand the breadth and scope of one's psychological interpretation of a given word or phrase or idea, and how our subconscious runs in the background without us really paying any attention at all. The automatic nature of our subconscious was largely formed when we were much, much younger, and so it can be very difficult to break patterns our minds are used to following. You know the old phrase, it's difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's very much true. The human mind is an awesome mystery. Even with today's technology, science is very much in the dark in terms of how the mind works. I really like the analogy of the mind being sort of like a biological equivalent of a holographic supercomputer, as we do know that there's a great deal of electrical activity occurring in the brain, along with the pineal gland. Now, the pineal gland, or third eye, consists of a cornea, a lens, and a retina, and is connected to the brain by a pedicle that is comparable to the optic nerve. Now, I think it's safe to assume that our mind's eye, or our ability to visualize and even dream, seem to be connected with the pineal gland. Furthermore, the pineal body is also an endocrine gland located in the brains of all vertebrates, which creates melatonin. Melatonin is, of course, the chemical involved with the inducing of sleep. So the pineal gland is extremely important and unique and is responsible for just a huge range of functions or background processes which have a profound impact on all of us psychologically and even physically, and yet the pineal gland is really not fully understood, as dreams are not fully understood. With all that being said, it's important to point out that while we humans are very smart compared to other life forms across the plane, our minds are manipulated covertly, or can be manipulated on a subconscious level, by people we trust via the multimedia onslaught. En masse, people are susceptible to repetitive suggestion amounting to psychological programming by hijacking our collective opinions on the macro level, and more insidiously manipulating the associations we form between words and symbols with images and ideas on the individual level. This systemic psychological programming spans our entire lives, running the full gambit of external stimuli, especially in the modern culture. With the luxuries of the modern world, our minds are easily manipulated in this manner, as we are hardwired to a system that constantly pushes forth programming of this sort. For example, hearing a single word can trigger a variety of reactions from our mind, including everything from visualization of images we've been conditioned to associate with the word, and associating ideas with those images. Of course, the manipulative art of corporate advertising has made a science out of altering our subconscious understanding of words, phrases, symbols, and images. You know, just do it, I'm loving it, we want change. The old phrase, old habits die hard, is very fitting in this case. What's interesting is that if you survey people on the topic, most people raised in a similar culture, say an American culture, for example, will all have very similar visual associations with certain words or phrases. This actually gets pretty deep if you research the topic and realize the full implications and how far back such mind control by governments and even the US government, but how far back it goes. Many advertisers also use subliminal cues or images and words that aren't seen by the rational mind but are sort of absorbed by the subconscious mind. And they do this to essentially hijack the associations that we form in our mind's eye. For example, nobody calls generic adhesive bandages, they're Band-Aids. Band-Aids is, of course, a corporate trademark, yet most people will always call a generic version a Band-Aid. The reason for this brief digression into looking at psychological manipulation was to impress upon the viewer that although our minds are very powerful and amazing, we are sadly vulnerable to be misled into believing fabricated illusions through repetition and the clever misguiding of our paradigm starting as early in life as possible. Like, when I hear the word globe, I still sort of picture the imaginary planet Earth in outer space with stars behind it. Sort of a cross between the Universal Pictures motion logo and the blue marble image courtesy the lying snakes at NASA. This is a very typical image association, which is not an accident. Disney and NASA and the government has spent untold sums of money and worked very hard to ensure that we all sort of have this picture in our mind. Even though I know the world to be a stationary plane and those images are forgeries, my subconscious mind is trained to envision this sort of imagery associated with the word Earth. This is a difficult thing to realize and admit to yourself, but just this one example of a single word association proves that I have indeed based a large part of my paradigm on ideas supplanted into my subconscious by people whom I've never met or even heard of. It's obvious by merely self-analyzing our thought processes, and often ignorant arrogance exposes the key ingredients which have ensured how such a great deception of scientism and heliocentrism were possible and indeed dominant in most of the world. Getting back on point, we had touched on the etymology of the word universe, breaking down the two parts uni and verse, assuming them to be merely a prefix and a suffix. As a reminder, the conventional interpretation of the word universe is from many come one, or e pluribus unum, yet there is another way still to interpret the intended meaning behind this particular word in so many languages, encapsulating the world and everything beyond it. If we instead consider uni, the prefix to verse, with verse meaning a poetic line or deliberately spoken phrase or even a part of a song, then we have the possibility of the word meaning a single verse or a single sentence. But I challenge you, or just go ahead and look up the word universe in many, many, many different languages, and you'll find that it's similar in all sorts of languages. Universe is almost a universal word. Anyway, so the point to all this is that between all of the possible interpretations of the word universe, again, from many come one, or e pluribus unum, or a single verse, or one fake-ass place, or the book of Genesis describes creation being spoken into existence, which jives fairly well with the term universe, just as an example of interpretation, a single verse. And finally, my personal association with the word, and probably the most popular, is an imaginary theoretical void of infinite space-time, filled with galaxies and their assumed planets, complete with fabricated, disproved theory of gravity binding it all together. To say the very least, the conventional understanding of the universe encompassing the world and everything beyond is unfounded, inexplicable, wholly illogical, and indeed theoretically impossible, with many examples one can cite. Yet that is what we conjure up when we hear the word universe. Now, one example of why such a thing is impossible is when humoring the heliocentric model or the universe, third-generation satellite bodies such as the moon and really even the Earth itself cannot possibly behave in the manner in which they are described to as orbital bodies. If you haven't seen my semi-detailed debunking of orbital mechanics, check out my playlist. It's called Flat Earth, Disproving Orbital Patterns for more information. The supposed orbital relationships in question relate to the galactic center, then the sun, then the Earth, then the moon, allegedly getting smaller and smaller, slower and slower as you go down that list. The Milky Way galaxy, which does not exist, is said to zoom through the non-existing infinite vacuum of space away from the center of the theoretical explosion some 15 billion years ago, just like all the other theoretical galaxies, which only exist in theory or imagination verse. Not to mention these other galaxies were not even postulated until 1929 by Hubble. Just as a side note, the Sun is then claimed to orbit what is called the galactic center of the hypothetical non-existing Milky Way galaxy along a single plane of orbit, just like the majority of the other so-called stars, just as they supposedly do in the hypothetical non-existing Milky Way galaxy. So, while the galaxy travels at some millions of miles per hour, the Sun is allegedly orbiting the theoretical galactic center on a plane of orbit roughly aligned to the galactic center, but a few degrees tilted from the galactic equator. I really would like to know what sort of floor allows the Sun, or any star for that matter, to maintain essentially a single plane of orbit around a galactic center in motion. It does not make sense. Anyway, there's no proof that the Earth is a sphere, no proof that gravity exists, ergo no proof that gravity tethers the Earth to its hypothetical orbit around the Sun. There's no proof that the Earth spins on its axis 365 times a year. There's no evidence to the idea that space is an infinite vacuum, and indeed the Milky Way galaxy is a theoretical fantasy along with all the other galaxies. When we look up into the night sky, most people imagine an infinitude of stars and worlds and believe this to be absolute fact. However, there is zero evidence to support this idea. And the stars appear to be relatively local. Relative compared to trillions of light years, they're a relatively local phenomenon compared to the theoretical light years involved with the distances purported in the heliocentric model. A few weeks ago, I was watching the sun come up at work and I noticed a nearly full moon in the west. I had to get a video of this because it is an impossible occurrence to view a nearly full moon from where I'm standing while the sun is out. I'll also create and describe a diagram to show how this phenomenon is impossible, assuming the heliocentric model. Furthermore, based on the conventional model, the orbit of the moon should cause us to view the moon during the day, only during the day, for a bit less than half of each month, and of course the phases of the moon during the day should be waning to no moon, and a bit beyond that. However, viewing a full moon during the day is an impossibility on the spherical Earth, I'm very sad to say, and yet we see full moons during the day all the time. You see, if the moon is reflecting the sun's light, and our relative position to the direction of the reflection is what causes the phases of the moon, then the moon would be on the opposite side of the Earth from any observer during the day for the full moon phases. I'll take this yet a step further and submit that a full moon should technically be an extremely rare sight in the heliocentric model, as we should experience a full lunar eclipse nearly every month, if not every month. Again, this should only occur during nearly every full moon phase. The sun is supposedly some 93 million miles away, while the moon is allegedly a mere 250,000 miles away, about 400 times closer. Since the moon supposedly orbits the Earth upon the ecliptic with a mere 5-degree tilt in its plane of orbit around the Earth, or a near-perfect alignment with the Earth's supposed plane of orbit around the Sun, this means that every single month, the moon, the Earth, and Sun should be in near-perfect alignment in terms of a lunar eclipse. Furthermore, with the Sun being a powerful source of light, the shadows cast by the Earth should spread out away from the Earth in a perfect cone shape, which means that even if the moon's alleged plane of orbit was misaligned with the ecliptic by a larger factor than a mere 5 degrees, lunar eclipses should still occur nearly every month for the duration of the full moon phase, and in fact a full moon should be impossible to see due to the Earth obstructing the sunlight. I'm really beside myself realizing there are so many theoretical astrophysicists all over the world who have dedicated their lives to studying space and orbital mechanics, yet have never realized the heliocentric model simply does not work, In theory, or, physically, it is impossible. Incidentally, if an astrophysicist is defined as, quote, a person who has a published peer review article in an astronomy journal, end quote, then according to NASA's Astrophysics Data System, ADS, there were a total of 72,897 astrophysicists living in 2013. I think it's so typical that NASA would only count those who've published peer review articles as bona fide lyrical hyperbolists, but what else would you expect, right? Do the people who studied this garbage for 4 years in college count if they didn't write, something in a peer-reviewed journal? They certainly have theorized about astronomy. Obviously, none of them are very clever or observant, but then again, neither are the ones with the fancy schmancy peer-reviewed articles. What about me? Do I count? Am I a astrophysicist? Surely I've theorized about astronomy and theoretical astrophysics, and this subject has been proven to be a dog and pony show in the heliocentric model, created to perpetuate the status quo by brainwashing intelligent people into wasting their time studying the lights in the night sky as if they are
potential destinations in the future.
Do we need a license to theorize the mechanisms that compromise the universe, or how we perceive it? I don't think so. I believe the correct definition of a theoretical astrophysicist is anyone who's looked at the stars and wondered what they are.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
What is gravity?
I have no idea. Okay, next question.
Technically, millions and millions of people qualify as theoretical astrophysicists to some, degree or another, but certainly there are more than 75,000 on the entire world as alleged by NASA. The scientific community is a failure and a joke who will be the laughingstock of future generations, to be sure. These 75,000 have their reputations, their egos, and meal tickets tied up in perpetuating the theoretical model of the universe, so they will certainly never write a peer-reviewed article about how preposterous the entire belief system involved with the spherical Earth actually is. And let's not forget the article would never be published were it even written. So it's a moot point no matter how you slice it. Now, I'm not sure who made up the rule that you must publish such an article to be considered capable of being curious about the universe and scrutinize it objectively, which is really all a theoretical astrophysicist is. Sure, you have some intelligent, imaginative, egotistical people who have spent gobs of money to get a degree in stargazing. However, the theorem spewed forth from this field will never be tested or falsified. To imagine one person, no matter how well educated, clever, or mathematically inclined, as somehow better suited to ponder the stars is a mistake, as they are completely misled about the true nature of the things, and their so-called education filters out facts, important facts, which happen to disagree with their beliefs, and ultimately saps their objectivity, ultimately rendering them less suited to skeptically analyze the world and all that lies beyond it in an accurate fashion. I suppose the degree-holding parrots of astrophysics will be given access to better equipment and will get paid for their often bizarre and nonsensical theories like gravity, black holes, galaxies, spherical worlds, da-da-da-da. However, it's impossible for anyone to remotely However, it's possible for anyone to remotely rent time on some of the most powerful telescopes in the world online, but wondering what the stars are and making guesses based on conjecture and Earth-based known physical laws, which are somehow automatically assumed to apply to the lights in the night sky for some reason, it's not exactly rocket science. Oh, geez, I can't even use that cliche phrase anymore. Rocket liance is more like it. Okay, so looking through a telescope at the stars isn't exactly bioengineering. They don't have to be correct in order for things to work in terms of astrophysics. If you're engineering something, whether it's electrical engineering or bioengineering or any sort of engineering, you must be correct or whatever you're engineering isn't going to work. Theoretical physicists have, sort of this sweet little thing going on where even if they're totally wrong, their models can still work in their brains, that nobody's ever going to build something based on what they come up with, right? So there's plenty of room for failure, I guess is what I'm saying. Now, even humoring gravitically induced orbits, the fact that we don't crash into the moon, as mentioned previously, once per month debunks the heliocentric model. We should be racing towards the moon at 66,600 miles per hour, while the moon travels a measly 2,200 miles per hour relative to the Earth, being slingshotted around the back of the Earth's path once per month due to the extremely powerful force of gravity, right? Then, about 12 days later, as the Earth is racing towards the moon, gravity is absent and even repelling the moon away from the oncoming Earth, right? This is hard to wrap your brain around, but this means that the moon would need to change its actual speed in cyclical, extreme fluctuations in order to maintain its constant speed around 2,200 miles per hour relative to the Earth. So, during the moon's monthly cycle, while it's racing against and passing the Earth's orbit, or passing the Earth in its orbit, the moon would need to travel through space at 68,800 miles per hour relative to a stationary observer on the sun. Yet 14 days later, while the moon is traveling in the opposite direction to the Earth's passive travel, it must be traveling only 64,200 miles per hour.
Now, as it was stated in the little intro to this animation that you're seeing here, this is actually sort of a 2D animation of the moon of the Earth, a third satellite body with the sun, Earth, and galaxy removed. What you'll notice is that at times the moon makes long curved paths through space-time. Even though it's two-dimensional, we'll just say space. So when it takes long curved paths through space, that represents the moon going extremely fast. And at other times you'll notice it making sort of sharper loops through space. That indicates the moon, moving very slowly through space. And the reason that this is a necessity in the heliocentric model is because all of the centers of orbit are in motion. So that means that at times, depending on the direction of travel, at times the moon is going to be traveling in the opposite direction as that of the Earth, and so would therefore need to slow down in space in order to maintain its perfect relative speed to the Earth or around the Earth. Now, at other times, it must somehow accelerate itself to many times faster than the Earth and sort of loop out in front of the orbital path of the Earth, which again, this is represented by the much larger, longer loops where the moon moves much more swiftly through space. Now, when you add the sun and the moon into this diagram, the whole idea of orbital mechanics is a physical impossibility according to the laws of gravity. Gravity is supposedly a constant inward tugging force towards a center of mass, or really, two masses tugging against each other relative to their size and density. Now, as far as I can tell, gravity is never attributed to acting as a repelling force, or a force that treats objects differently at different times in order to adhere to a theory. Gravity would behave the same all the time. So like the gravity would behave between the Earth and the Moon consistently at all times. It's not going to change its force at some times and change its force at other times unless the Moon's distance slightly varies. But what I'm talking about is gravity is simply incapable of providing the necessary sort of smart guidance or intelligent control of the moon to somehow allow it to adhere to a single plane of orbit around the sun, around the Earth. Because remember, the Earth is supposedly orbiting the sun at a 60-degree angle to the galactic plane, while the sun goes around the galactic plane at 250,000 miles an hour, and the galactic plane is hauling ass through space at some millions of miles an hour. Now, I've brought this up before, But the only way to animate this so that it even is physically possible is to have the speeds of the objects totally ass backwards. So what I mean by this is that the galaxy would be the fastest object in our area. Okay, it's going 2-3 million miles an hour at least. Okay, and that is in a direction, say, 90 degrees to the path of the sun. Now, as the sun goes around the galactic equator on a single plane of orbit, which really doesn't make sense in a vacuum gravitic situation, but yeah, the sun maintains a single plane of orbit around the moving center of the galaxy. I'm still at a loss as to how a black hole moves at all, but yeah, they say the center of a galaxy is a black hole moving. I mean, really, I thought a black hole was a push in at all directions, so forceful that even light cannot escape, pushing in all directions, warping space-time into essentially maybe another dimension, and yet these black holes can fly through space millions of miles an hour. So assuming that's true, and assuming the sun's going around the Earth, assuming the sun's going around the galactic center, the Earth's going around the sun at a 60-degree angle to the sun's path, and the moon is going around the Earth at essentially, along that same ecliptic, maybe offset by 5 degrees to the Earth's path around the sun. All of this motion is not explained adequately by gravity. Gravity sort of seems to work nice when everything's stationary. You can see the moon orbiting the Earth in a nice little stationary animation. But when you add motion to this, that's where the problems arise. Now remember, the galaxy is supposedly speeding through space at 200 or 3 million miles an hour. I've even heard estimates of 60 million miles an hour, but it's hauling ass. But in order to show this on a screen that you can see all these little pieces, you have to animate it as the slowest body. Okay? Now, furthermore, the next fastest object in our situation is the sun, which is, again, 250,000 miles an hour around the galactic equator. In order to make the animation work, you have to animate it as the second slowest body, or the almost, very, very slow. Furthermore, the Earth is allegedly slower than the sun, and yet we have to animate it faster than the sun. And the slowest object of them all, the moon, you must animate it. In order for the animation to even jive, you must make the moon the fastest object. Now, keeping in mind, this is all ass backwards. I mean, could you imagine how fast the moon would have to be if you animated the galaxy actually traveling 250 million miles an hour? So the simple fact that we now have the ability to animate fairly complex, heliocentric models, whether it's in a 2D or 3D environment, is irrelevant. The principles are clear through computers that are not so clear to someone just thinking about this. You can consider the Earth orbiting the sun as a fixed frame of reference that the moon is orbiting around, and so it more or less keeps its general distance from the Earth the same. However, this is physically impossible when the Earth is traveling, 66,600 miles an hour away from the moon at that point, and towards the moon at that point. And yet you get this perfect elliptical cycle of the moon. But again, this isn't even really the point. The point is that in order to get the animation to work, the fastest object, being the galactic center, must be animated as the slowest object, while the slowest object, being the moon, must be animated as the fastest object in order to get this to even work. So those, long curved lines that you're looking at, showing the moon accelerating to extreme velocities, well, those would be exacerbated by many orders of magnitude, while in the other conditions where the moon shows sharp loops or sharp curves, indicating that it's moving slower, well, that would be, you would need to compensate for that, so the moon would actually have to retrograde. If this is making any sense to you guys, I hope it is. But any animators out there, try to animate a working model solar system and galaxy, and just do the galaxy, the sun, the earth, and the moon, and see if you can get this to work using two-scale relative speeds without breaking all of the laws of physics. You can't have a satellite body like the moon, which is, sort of encircling the earth very slowly, represented as the fastest object in a galaxy, in order for the animation to work, because that is indeed the only way the animation will work. If you were to somehow be able to, and I guess there may be some way to be able to animate a galaxy in real time, so, in real relative time or speed, as well as real relative size of the objects, which are sort of secondary, but it's kind of important to get the size right. But even just in real-time speed, relative speeds are representative of what they actually are. You simply cannot get an animation to work like that of orbiting bodies. That's not how physical reality works, and so I think that this is the biggest debunking point of orbital mechanics, is that they're physically impossible, and gravity must be a repelling force, especially in the case of the moon, or in the case of the ISS, when such satellites are in the path of an object the size of the Earth, racing towards it at 66,000 miles an hour.
A deceleration of about 4,400 miles per hour after looping around the front of the Earth, and then re-accelerate to 68,800 miles per hour relative to a stationary observer on the Sun, of course, in order to pass the Earth and start the process all over. Now, I'll quickly mention that the stationary observer is technically flying through space at 500,000 miles per hour along with the frame of reference of the Sun, and simultaneously flying in another direction at over 1,000,000 miles per hour according to the frame of reference with the galaxy, but he's stationary because the Earth and Moon are doing the same thing too, along with all the other spinning and orbiting hypothetical planets. And what proof do we have for any of this motion, let alone all of this motion, which must be occurring in order for the heliocentric model to work? None. No proof. We have the theory of gravity. People will always chuckle at this mention, but as I've said before, the observation "what goes up must come down" is not proof of gravity. It is an observation. Dropping a brick on one's foot is not proof of gravity, rather a simple demonstration of the physical law, what goes up must come down. The fact that most people, including so-called scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy, believe that releasing an object which immediately accelerates towards the ground proves the world is a spinning sphere, and proves gravity is sad, disappointing, and comical at once. If you don't understand the humor, the point is, what goes up must come down on flat Earth. Get it? What goes up must immediately sever its adherence to the alleged rotational frame of reference of the spherical Earth, then come down at a slightly different angle due to gravity, should be what we've got here, but it's not what we've got. So, like, if you can imagine a giant ball, say as big as a house, spinning around on an axis, now imagine that you can walk around the side of that giant spinning ball. What do you think is going to happen if you throw an object perpendicular to the axis, or up, above your head from your perspective? Do you think that object is going to continue rotating around the spinning house with you, and then fall back sideways or downwards to your head, perfectly vertically relative to your rotational frame of reference on the side of the spinning house? The answer is no. The object thrown away from the axis of rotation would immediately lose its rotational frame of reference and would appear to accelerate away from the central axis, apparently in a contrary direction to your spinning. So people who believe what goes up must come down as proof of the world's twirling sphericity and gravity are indeed completely ass backwards in their reasoning, and should really reconsider their position on this whole thing based on this one point alone. Just to be clear, in case you're new to this topic, the stationary plane Earth is not alleged to be a disk in outer space. For all intents and purposes, outer space doesn't exist except in concept or theory or in the minds of theoretical physicists, and the world is the only known physical plane in existence. The physical plane housing our world could stretch out to infinity, or it could end somewhere beyond the known seas and continents. We really don't know. The world appears to be housed within the physical plane of reality, and could potentially be just one of many similar areas on the plane. The area we're familiar with has imaginary boundaries ascribed to it based on the cycle of the sun. The sun and geothermal warmth have carved out a relatively temperate zone within what are apparently vast seas and or a very thick sheet of ice which blankets most of the physical plane beyond the known world. Although we've been led to believe that the polar regions are essentially the top and bottom ends of the Earth according to its alleged axis, the area beyond the light of the sun and the heat of the Earth probably dwarfs the world that we know by many orders of magnitude. In other words, there's possibly an endless physical plane which has never been gazed upon by people, although we absolutely possess the technology and resources to explore and document the lands beyond the North and South polar regions. I would wager that the world governments participating in the Antarctic treaties have spent decades doing just this, but under the radar, using black budget funding and personnel who are either ignorant to the full implications of whatever they may be doing in the Antarctic, for example, or individuals compromised by the various oaths of silence to the secret brotherhoods who have incrementally seized power of virtually all influential and government-controlled groups across the world.
That sounds like a bright future. With this being the end of section 4, really 5, because there was 3.5, but with this being the end of section 4 of The Globe is Dead, I just wanted to finish off with a big thanks to all of my subscribers, all my viewers, all y'all out there are great. I hope that this series has helped you or someone that you love to come closer to the truth. I believe that this whole thing is no less than the great deception being unveiled. I think that's how important this is, and so you can probably imagine I've spent hundreds of hours on this particular video series, and you may have also noticed that I've recently stopped advertising channels to methods to contribute to this channel because I've had to go out of the house for income, and I recently scored a contract working from home, which was going great up until this week when the contract was canceled indefinitely. So what I'm going to do real quick is shamelessly plug my PayPal email address, so that if any of y'all out there have found this documentary series helpful and you would like to contribute to the efforts of this channel so that I can continue making videos that you enjoy, your contribution is greatly appreciated, although it is not obligatory. If you don't like to use PayPal, or if you don't have PayPal, but it really is easy, there is the option to use the Google fan funding, which you can find on the Morgile main page. Although Google, in all its generosity, holds that money for 2 months and keeps 10% of it. So, at any rate, you can look at the email address on screen if you would like to contribute via PayPal, or if nothing else, if you would like to help out the channel continue, you can use fan funding. And if not, at least it's the thought that counts. So even if you thought about it but you don't have the money, then thank you for that. And with all that being said, I just want to end this series on a positive note. I think this revelation is very much a positive thing. It's something that's long overdue. Yes, we will be ridiculed for it. Yes, we will be called all sorts of ill things and face public humiliation. But hey, when it's the truth, it's the truth. And when you stand behind the truth, then you're at least trying to do the right thing. So thank all y'all out there for trying to do the right thing by simply telling the truth. And that is that the Earth is and always has been a stationary plane, a static plane, if you will. And with this revelation, I think that we're going to see big changes in the next generation. And I have faith that it will be for the better. Finally, real quick, if you'd like to tithe and help out orphans in Pakistan, go to sogss.com. That's shelterofgodssundayschool.com. Your money goes to help orphans in Pakistan. Even a little bit helps. So check that out if you want to tithe. And so with that, y'all, God bless you. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace.